Hello and welcome to day 43. Today's reading is from Leviticus 5 to 7. But before I go into that, let me share a quick story. When I was younger, I thought I was born in the wrong testament. I felt it would be easier to walk in the Old Testament because you had much more accessible, much more visible representations of God and His power. We looked at when Moses came down from the mountain, and the people knew there was a mountain there. And when he came, he commanded the Levites to kill 3,000 of the Israelite people, of the Hebrew people that had just come out of Egypt. And I felt that would be deterrent enough to sort of fix up. I felt in my naivete, in my young, uh, optimistic mind, that we have too much grace now, and thus we take for granted. And you have, people doing all sorts. Um, that was largely wrong. That was largely from a understanding that somehow saw God differently in the Old Testament than He was in the New, as though between the two testaments, God changes, and we have fireball throwing, uh, you know, um, plague sending, uh, destructive God in the Old Testament, and hippie, happy white Jesus in the New. Um, I have since learned my lesson. And I think these chapters go to speak of, on the one hand, how God has always been and remains, um, you know, gracious. But on the other hand, I think I was going to recognize, the people that were led by a column of fire at night and a column of cloud at day still could grumble and say that they were better off in slavery than under the Lord. They still rejected God. They still picked a king, and that's to come. And I would be no different, honestly. Um, so yeah, let's look at it. The reason I say God has always been gracious because we're looking today at the sin offering. So yesterday we looked at the burnt offerings, which were a devotion to God, the grain offerings, which were a voluntary or memorial, no, a voluntary offering, um, maybe a Thanksgiving offering as well, the peace or fellowship offering, which was also voluntary and expressed thanksgiving, and then the sin offering for unintentional sins. Now we're about to jump into some, I guess, more intentional sins um, in chapter 5. So in chapter 5, there's also a sort of unintentional sin in that you've unknowingly touched something that was or makes a person unclean. There's a sacrifice specifically for that. Um, a female flock, either sheep or goats. Another interesting study might be to look into the specifics of the offerings. And I'm going to do these studies. I should write them down. I should write them down somewhere to do. Let's grab a notebook. Because I think these are interesting, right? So yesterday I mentioned, what's today's date? 14th. Ooh, happy Val's Day, everyone. um, so the colors of the stones, relevance or meaning, and today the specifics of the offerings, especially sin offerings and their meanings. So it's written down now. I should get it done. because I think it'll be interesting to look into. Right, so why was it that for this particular sin, it was this particular offering that was required, and see where that leads. I think that could be interesting. Um, but yes, there was for an unintentional, unknowingly becoming impure. And then there was the guilt offering, which I thought was interesting because there were some sins that were um, you were aware of it. So, for instance, in 517, should you sin by violating one of the law's commands, even if you are unaware? Which for me gives an accommodation for if you are aware and you violate a sin, one of the law's commands, there was an offering you can bring. There was a means to again cover your sin. Now, a lot of the offerings had an air of being, you know, building tradition, building ritual around some of these things. On the one hand, to highlight their significance in terms of in the presence of a holy God. You don't want to do certain things. We later on learn that the law was given that sin might be actually highlighted, might increase in terms of the law isn't given to make you sin, but the law is given to highlight the fact that sin is what it is. But even then, we have these means within which, we can recognize that there is a cost to sin. Um, and the reason I highlight this is because this remains an element of grace. It wasn't that in the Old Testament they didn't have grace. It wasn't that if they sinned in the Old Testament, then they were guaranteed to die. It was, they had to produce a an offering that would serve as a guilt offering to cover their sin. Now, on the one hand, it reinforces the idea that there is a cost to sin, but then we can then relate to that in that, it's always been sin requires death. The wages of sin was always death. In the Old Testament, they had the bulls and the goats, which was insufficient. But then we on this side of history have the final, ultimate lamb that was slain to take away our sins. In chapter 6, we get some specifics on which sins actually, you know, uh, require a guilt offering, and this was again sort of detailing, and all of these I don't think are meant to even be exhaustive, but are meant to give a overwhelming sense of who God is and what He sees right and wrong. And so there's lots here, Um, what was it? Just some examples: lying in court, um, fraud, theft, all of these things, so that there was I think, an undeniable understanding of right and wrong according to God. And then there's more instructions, especially for the priests, on what to do with the offerings that are given, how the priests themselves are supposed to come, the offerings they're supposed to offer for themselves, and consecrating themselves and making them approachable to God. And God forbidding certain actions around the offering. So the meat of certain offerings were to be eaten, and some could be eaten the next day, but by the third they had to be completely burnt. All these rules governing their now new behavior around um, the presence of God. And I think it's when you have any sort of ritual around certain things, there's an appreciation for those things. There's a significance given to those things by virtue of the nature of that ritual around them. And God has given them a means by which to identify, a means by which to um, fully appreciate the significance of the God living among them, I think, through these. So that's 5 to 7 Again, I've read this already, and I'm sort of giving us highlights as we go through. Tomorrow's reading is Leviticus 8 to 10, and yeah, I hope that we will. I'm hoping to be here tomorrow, God willing, and we can go through that as well. All right, I am pretty beat. I'm gonna go get some sleep, and I will catch you, God willing, tomorrow. Peace out.